Hello, Dana. Thank you so much for joining us today for International Women's Day. I'm the perfect person to do this recording with. So, Dana is an absolute powerhouse. Um, Before this, I was reading a bit more about her so we can make sure this interview is perfect. And oh God, I'm in absolute awe of how much she does. I need to learn how to do so much in such few hours because wow. So, Dana was a journalist in her early career, then switched over as a lawyer and now has her own business, which is just fantastic. She's done so much for the women in law, including the first 100 Years project, which we'll talk about later. But Dana, over to you. Tell us more about you.
Where can I start? So I grew up in communist Romania. I never dreamt of becoming a lawyer. I thought law was part of the system, and I was a bit of a contrarian, so I couldn't follow. I couldn't follow the rules. I had to be against them. I guess it's the luxury of the youngest child in the family to be the rebel, right? And I really basically took that to heart, so I could call my own kind of shots, if you like,
Yep.
because my parents were too exhausted from the other two to notice me. So, and basically, once communism collapsed and a new regime took hold, journalism seemed to be the perfect career for me, to be challenging why things were in the way they were. And so anyway, I went into journalism out of high school straight without going to university, which was fantastic, really great training ground, really great opportunity to learn about stories and actually being very close to people, which I loved. I always found being among people, listening to them, really exciting. And kind of my human first philosophy must have come from that. I was always in the middle of a crowd, not necessarily to be the center of it, because I wasn't, as an observer, I was really soaking in what the dynamic was, what the power kind of struggles were. That really interested me as a child as well. So I went into journalism, and then once I started, my career started taking off. I came over to London to be working on the international level as a journalist. And I suddenly realized that I was asking all these questions. I was so annoying of like all these people I had to write stories about. But I felt maybe it was time to go and get an education, and I went to the LSE to study. I studied history at undergraduate level, and then I stayed on for a political economy master's, because this kind of dynamic between economics and politics always interested me, because they are really kind of together. They're not separate. And so that was really interesting. I never thought I'd be a lawyer, because again, in my mind, law was part of status quo. It was what maintained regimes, it wasn't something. But then I met my husband, my future husband, and he was training to be a barrister. And I got to learn more about law through his experience, hanging out with pupil barristers and students on the BBC, I think it was, when I met him, and dining at his inn and that kind of weird stuff that you get to do. And I thought, actually, this is really interesting. I was curious about, the intellectual challenge of law. I didn't really think about becoming a lawyer. And then one day I thought, actually, maybe this is, a path that I can pursue. So I embarked in a part-time course to do my conversion, having not studied law, in the evening, whilst I was working for the Economist Group in the day as a journalist, and did that. It took a long time because when I was studying in the evening, it's quite hard work and working full time.
Really tough. I'm still doing it. I did it for my undergrad and now I'm doing the conversion, the SQE right now. And I can tell you, evening study is one of the worst things ever. Worth it, and Dana's an example of it's worth it. And I sometimes remind myself that, but I'm with you on that one.
I think it requires extra dedication. But for me, what was really interesting is that when I decided I was clear that I wanted to go into business law. I was interested in the city world, what transactions were happening and what role the lawyers played in those transactions. What did the lawyers do
Yeah.
when you would read about an IPO? I didn't really understand. I was excited about the transaction, but I didn't understand the legal role. And so I thought I'd go into these city law firms, because then I learn about the documentation that underpins these transactions and everything. And I was quite saddened when I went to my careers office and I said, I'd like to go and apply and get a training contract with one of the top firms. And they looked at me and they were like, part-time student, evening student, I don't think you'll get a training contract with a top firm. They don't recruit from part-timers. I thought, well, I'll show you. So off I went, and I did get myself a training contract with Linklaters. So it's definitely not true that people write you off just because you take a different path.
Mm.
But you kind of have to discourage yourself from listening too carefully to that kind of advice, because otherwise you'll never push for yourself. Anyway, so yeah, so that's my kind of arrival in law was long-winded, not deliberate, and it didn't seem to have any prospects of succeeding. um, but once I set my eyes on the kind of, I started applying from the top down, and just in batches of firms, from
Yeah.
the magic circle down. And I didn't have to go too far down, luckily, to stop and and focus on
Good.
my other kind of priorities. But anyway, so that's kind of I ended up qualifying and leaving quite soon after.
Mhm.
In the end, it wasn't what I wanted to do long term.
Long term. Okay. You really have challenged the status quo. You've challenged where you came from and really shown that, you can get through a lot. The slogan for this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. And what does that slogan mean to you? And what does Women's Day mean to you? I know you told me this before we started, but I think it would be an interesting thing for our listeners to know.
So the kind of slogan of the year to me is something that in a way I've always done.
Mm,
It's not a choice that I make one year at a time. I think challenging why certain things are the way they are and asking yourself, can I change something for the better,
mm,
is something that I've always done for as long as I've known myself. I always like to tinker with things and explore new ways of, I don't know, doing some knitting or helping my dad, with his work or anything. But for me, I always took the view that it was a choice to
mm,
challenge rather than that you exercise, and I always have done. I think it's just something I feel comfortable with change as well. So, very often what would stop you from wanting to do it is the fear of what will happen. Are you
mm,
creating a chaos that you can't put back in a box? I didn't have that fear because I don't think you can make any progress without asking the question, why are these things the way they are, and is this still, valid?
mhm,
um, and also for me what's really interesting is think of my role in the world, but in a beyond myself, right? So what do I contribute that can make a lasting impact that isn't just about benefiting me, but thinking about the wider world. And so the bigger philosophical kind of preoccupations I have about my role in the world. And
mhm,
therefore, once you challenge yourself in that kind of why do I exist, why do I need to, what do I do as my role in the world, then you realize you can't just stay silent.
mm,
But similarly, I haven't been, challenged, if you like, in a kind of way that involves, what would you do if a war broke out or something really life and death. So I think in a way it's an easy question to answer because I haven't really had the very, very big humanity like challenges facing me as an individual. So slightly easier to answer, I think. But it's good to seek change and then
yeah.
to make sure the change is good.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think we haven't been through wars or anything, but everyone's struggles are different, and we are really through a pandemic. You've done an incredible job through a pandemic, working from home, teaching the kids. You have a new podcast come out with your daughter, and you've achieved all that through a pandemic, which is huge, and you challenged what you could do.
Yeah, I mean, I am preoccupied, and I guess I am an entrepreneur at heart, and
Mm,
also maybe a journalist at heart, because with journalism, you always have to find a new story, a new angle.
mm,
You can't say the same thing, and even if you are covering the same story, you've got to tell your story in a different voice. So I think that kind of helps me look for a new way of saying something. And as an entrepreneur, you need to find an economic gap that you're trying to fill with your product. So you're always thinking, if I see this opportunity, how do I grow it? How do I make it bigger? And it is just a natural kind of instinct that I have around gap opportunity, discovery.
Mm.
And then obviously I have this ability to make things happen, which is, I'm really grateful that I'm active in that way, and I don't just get the idea, I execute the idea, which is a nice combination. um I am definitely aware of the fact that I've got this ability to turn ideas into something.
Yeah.
um an International Women's Day, what does it mean? I have grown to love it.
Yeah.
Primarily because when I was growing up, it was a kind of very big celebration of women, and it originated in a kind of very socialist idea of
Mhm.
celebrating women once a year. And obviously the UN then came, and it became a UN kind of led
Mhm.
anniversary. But it was something that I felt the state was demanding of us, as opposed
Okay.
to we were choosing. And as you can see, I always go against the current, right? So
Yeah.
if we had no choice to challenge, then I was challenging in my own way. And so I kind of grew up with this enforced celebration of women
Okay.
that I just didn't really enjoy.
Mm.
Whereas now I see the power it can bring to unifying the voices of women that want that change faster.
Okay.
So it's a really different use of it.
Mhm.
But it was very different when I was growing up.
Perfect. Some of the things you've done have been, well, all of the things, but one of the things I'm a big fan about and just loops in so well with Choose to Challenge and bringing change with women together is the first 100 Years Project. Tell us more about what the project is and why you started it and where you see it going, because you have another project that's the next 100 years.
So I started actually in March 2014. That
Mhm.
was the kind of official soft launch. I I guess started. I mean, I know what instigated the actual action of starting it, but
Mhm.
at the back of my mind, I had a constant preoccupation because of my business, which was built around creating flexible opportunities for lawyers that didn't want to be tied to their desk and chairs at the office, and they would end up completely leaving.
Mhm.
So I was thinking of new ways of working that really leverage people's talent and really change the culture of the legal sector. Because how can you allow somebody who's highly educated, highly trained, just because
Mhm.
she had a couple of kids, suddenly push her completely out? I just couldn't. I took issue with that. I thought it was if really bad from as bad, maybe a discrimination, but also I was
Mhm.
thinking it's bad economically because it's not efficient for the labor market. So it just didn't make any sense to me that that was happening. And
Yeah.
I guess at the back of my mind I kept having this kind of I was observing the fact that women were unable to break through. A lot of the
Mhm.
people that I knew who were partners were always men. They always seemed to be looking the same.
Mhm.
With the girls when I was training, we always seemed to have a different kind of challenge. We were never with the kind of the ones that were chosen from the beginning to be the future of the firm. We seemed to
Yeah.
be kind of always not taken as seriously, I think. And so all of those kind of the collection of thoughts, I guess, I gathered in my kind of legal life.
Mhm.
And I had the benefit of stepping out of it for a couple of years, where I set up a completely different business after I left Linklaters. For 3 years,
Mhm.
I ran a political risk business.
Mhm.
So as an entrepreneur, but outside of the legal sector. And I
Okay.
think that time out allowed me to consolidate my thoughts, and kind of just some order established itself in my head.
Mhm.
And so when I came across this photograph of the one woman in the middle of a group of partners from Herbert Smith they were in 1982,
Okay.
suddenly that photograph spoke to me, because suddenly I thought, so I was already born, there was only one woman, so this was what was happening within my lifetime. So why are we surprised we don't have women at the top? Why do they only have the one? Why don't we know anything about this? And so I went, stirred by that photograph. Suddenly I realized that maybe a lot of the questions that I had in my mind and
Mhm.
observations that I collected maybe could be answered by really going deeper into this photograph somehow.
Okay.
And that's how I started researching the history and discovering that women were not persons and the law had to be changed to make us persons, and all these absurd reasons to keep women
Mm.
out, which was just insulting and demeaning, across the board, from allowing them to attend university without giving them degrees, um, giving them joke diplomas, just everything seemed to be all about putting them down and not allowing
Mm.
them to really show their brilliant minds.
Yeah.
And so that discovery that until 1919 women couldn't be by law allowed to become lawyers,
Oh, yes.
uh, it was stunning really to me, because I had no education in that space. I was a lawyer and I didn't know. So I asked my other friends and they didn't know. So we were ignorant about history basically. And so all of these kind of changes or lack of women or role models, all of that were always stories that were in isolation. So they would never stick against a kind of central core. So,
Mm.
they were fleeting about every year when the partnerships would announce numbers and then they would be gone.
Yeah.
Nobody was centralizing, say, okay, what does it really mean? Why is it this way? Why is 3% bad? Why is one woman not enough? And anyway, so that photograph got me to do some research, discover the 1919 year.
Mm.
And then I really quick calculated that the centenary was coming up, and
Okay.
that's why it was called the first 100 years, because it was the first 100 years
Yes.
after the act, and it allowed us to, if you like, centralize. And almost, like when you have these tapes where they catch flies, right? And the flies keep coming, and then they just get stuck to it, and you just think
Mm.
suddenly all the stories got stuck to a center that wasn't there before. And I think that was the point of the campaign, was to create
Mm.
that opportunity to start seeing all these different things that were flying around against the historic context, to see,
Mm.
okay, is this good progress against what? Well, actually it is
Yeah.
very good progress that 50% of the profession is female now. That's really great progress from
Okay.
zero. But is it good progress that the gap in how we pay women is 20%? Well, that's
Okay.
not so good progress. So suddenly you can challenge some of the
Mm.
things that are really sticky, and also discard some of the things that are no longer battles to be fought. So it really made, I think, a difference to making sure we were informed, and
Mm.
when we get pushback, we have the pushback,
Yeah.
to basically say that's not a good enough argument. That's
Mm.
what people used to say in 1930.
Yeah.
So suddenly
You
you had
can't.
more ammunition to fight some of the kind of arguments coming to basically dissuade us from trying to ask for more.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was how it started. It started from this photograph, and
Mm.
then before I knew it, we said, okay, let's do a library of role models, because that seemed to be a real gap.
Mm.
Let's use video because it's more social media friendly, it's easier, and also it communicates with the next generation coming behind much more. It's more engaging rather than just writing lots of articles, which is nice, or taking pictures. But we said, look, let's just hear these women talk about their lives. And also, for me, what was really important, I think that's linked to my journalism background, is that I didn't want to have jargon and kind of weird legal lingo and just talk about the cases and things like that. I wanted them
Yeah.
to really explain where their parents came from, how they grew up, when did they decide to be lawyers. So really focusing on actually showing that just because somebody is a baroness at the end of their successful career,
Mm.
they didn't start a baroness. Most of
Yeah.
them they were self-made.
Mm.
It was
Their
the
story and journey.
perseverance, the resilience, the hard work, um, just challenging basically status quo that made them succeed. And I thought that was really interesting, because it showed every story and every path has its own individuality. You can't have one recipe that fits everybody, but you need to create, I always say, the role model for you or for anybody is not one individual, it's a collection of different people that have resonate with you. So maybe one says, well, I've lost a parent, it's anything where it happened to me, and it was a crossroads. What do you do in your life when something so significant happens? And they talk about how they manage that situation. You think, yeah, I really, this is a character I identify with. And then you have another story about I went and I applied to be a trainee, and they told me some awful things, and you identify with that because you had the
Mm,
pushback at those moments. So you're not looking for one person to give you the answer to everything. You make your role model out of all these stories
yeah.
because you're learning how to manage your own challenge. So anyway, for me that was really nice because I thought it was about gender and diversity from that point of view, but it became diversity being each one's story being different from one another, and being able
Mm,
to really pick, and men and women can learn from their journeys equally.
yeah.
And we wanted to make it very accessible, so it's really enjoyable, friendly, nice visual, not a kind of usual what you expect from the legal profession, really heavy text and lots of
Yeah.
small print, and a few footnotes, and before you know it everybody disengages. So we really want to make it a really fun educational project that is full of curiosity,
Mm,
um, and slightly different from what I had seen in the legal profession that tended to be very dry and
yeah.
kind of a bit boring. Um, and I think that was quite a fresh approach that luckily it's stuck, and many more people are using it, which is really great.
Yeah, I think it's such a great thing to do. The videos have genuinely inspired me, and I've seen some of them and felt, you know what, if they can do it, I can too. A lot of those people, you see their like names on big websites, but you never know what's behind their story. It's a bit like social media where you see everyone achieving so much and you start to feel, oh, can I ever do that? But when you know the story behind it, you can feel like you can do it. What you said to me really struck me that there was only one female in that photo. I've still gone on a few websites of law firms or corporate companies, and they still just one female. How can firms move from that? And do you think there's been a real growth in the past, since 2013 to now? Has there been growth? And if there hasn't, or if there has, how can we keep growing in that space? How can more women enter the corporate world?
Well, I think the number of women going in, and a lot of the kind of trainee runs are very female.
Yeah.
There's good representation at the kind of start of the careers, not necessarily equally among diverse groups. So you're not having a good balanced entry
Mm,
level. So I'm not saying if you are a black woman, you're not going to be equally represented. So there is an issue there around how diverse is your trainee population coming in,
yeah.
how broadly do you recruit from a social background point of view, education point of view. So there's a lot of kind of layers to diversity, but from a gender point of view I think we've definitely come a long way. And
Mhm.
even my intake was 50-50 in
Okay.
terms of gender. The problem is what happens as they try to rise, and
Mm,
who is getting the kind of yes leader to be. And a lot of these assessments happen much earlier than we realize at the junior end. There's
mm,
and often the kind of decision makers are making them in their own image. So you can rule out a woman because you're not thinking about how she's a leader maybe in a different way, and
mm,
therefore you disengage with that side of the population. So to me there's a lot of work to be done in access to the legal profession at
mhm,
a younger age group, around making sure it's a really truly diverse background, diverse group
mhm,
in the widest sense of the word, not just women.
mm,
Um, but the real challenge is what happens in leadership, and that
yeah.
is dire across the board from a diversity point of view. No minority leadership, no women. And is that changing? Marginally. A lot of the firms have introduced the whole kind of salaried partnership layer
Mhm,
because that's a lower risk way of doing it. Obviously,
mhm,
partnership is about equity.
yeah.
Equity is where the real money is made, and salaried is a safety net.
Mhm,
If you're a salaried partner, you get paid, and then you maybe have some equity. But generally speaking, you also have less of a voice in decision making. And so I think that route that was introduced, I would be for very radical, just remove it, because it
okay.
creates a false sense of security. It doesn't give the right voice to the people that get it.
Okay.
It might give them some security from an income point of view, but when you
Mm,
are a partnership and you join, and if you're transparent, part of the step change into partnership involves an element of risk, which
mm,
is the same as when you become an entrepreneur. You take
yeah.
an informed decision, you have to maybe borrow capital, and you going there to build a business. And a
Mm,
partner, that's essentially what they do. So I think it just needs to be very clearly stated that that's part of it, and train and help people much earlier, really at the entry level, to say this is how a partnership works. You need to build,
mm,
a book of business. You need to have client relationships, and then really ask yourself, if I leave really strong books of clients, do I always pick the boys to pick them up from me, or am I
okay.
actually leaving that legacy of good business to some of the women so they can pick up good accounts and build their case to be a big,
A big.
rainmaker? So to
Mm,
me, I wouldn't have this salary layer, because it's just putting women on a kind of another track
mm,
from which is very difficult to escape. And it's convenient because the numbers suddenly look slightly better, but in equity terms, there hasn't really been change. I think equity partnership is still about 16%,
yeah.
which is, hasn't changed really in the last 15, 20 years.
No.
And the other thing is, I've always been a supporter of quotas, because I think quota is very often seen as a kind of appointment of one.
Mm,
But to me, I think quota is an appointment of a group. And in a group, if you get a bunch of women in together, yes,
yeah.
you will have some will do not so well, and some of them will do very well. But you
Mm,
create a safety net so you don't overexpose one for being the only one.
yeah.
And therefore, she's observed, and every movement is judged. And then you say, well, I've had one woman and she failed.
Okay.
um, when you recruit people in a group, some will do well and some won't be good, good. But I
Yeah.
think, to me, that's one rapid way of getting more numbers without,
Mm,
and spreading some of the risk from failure of the individual, but also to the
yeah.
firm.
Mm,
And I've always been an advocate. I think that is the fastest way to achieve transformation, in really seeing a significant change and seeing visibly the change at the
mm,
top. But firms are resisting that because it is about self-regulation, and obviously they are private organizations.
yeah.
um, and they say, well, time will allow this, group of women that is lower down to rise
Mm,
up, because it's natural, natural attrition and things. But it's too slow, and at the current rate, I think we're looking at 168 or something for
mm.
maybe reaching parity, which is, we'll all be dead. So I don't think that's a good enough pace,
No,
and there
exactly.
must be some other measures that can be
Mm,
taken, that are limited in time and not forever. You're not trying to say to a
yeah.
firm, you run yourself this way for a long time, but aiming to really force the change by asking themselves, is this talent really not here?
Mm,
Why can you not possibly find? I mean, I see so many women starting their own law firms, being entrepreneurial.
yeah.
Why could they not be entrepreneurial within a structure where actually the whole benefit of being in that bigger group is that you have the network effects, and therefore your
Mm,
business, you can scale faster.
faster.
You have a safety net around you. You've got more infrastructure.
More
So why do we
capital.
more capital? So why not create an environment of intrapreneurship, where these
Mm,
women can really scale internally rather than always pushing them completely out? So we've got a lot of successful women always on the periphery, but never
mm,
at the table. And I think that is something that needs to be addressed and recognized. And we need to talk about it, because
yeah.
otherwise we'll dance around the problem, um, and we are ignoring the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
So I don't like to ignore the elephant if I
No.
can, not least because it's big, so it needs to be tackled in a good way. So
Yeah.
that's one of the ways we could do it. Just do
Mm,
something quite radical, like introducing quotas, and
yeah.
doing away with the salary step, which is actually an invention just to make the numbers look that little bit better.
Yeah. And just make it look like it's better than it actually is. Yeah.
Well, yes, because they don't tell us the breakdown, right? So you
No.
can get the partnership numbers. It says we're nearly at 26%, and you say, well,
Mm,
what percent is equity? And then suddenly, the picture looks unchanged.
yeah.
So it's whichever way you cut the stats, right? But I think we just need to have honest conversations around what's going on, and
Mm,
also not to be there's so much opportunity for growth. So a woman winning doesn't mean a man is losing.
No.
There's this idea of a zero sum game in this space, that
Mm.
somehow if the women get what they want, somehow all the men are losing out. And I think there's so many different ways in which we deliver work these days, so many
Mm.
different players, it's a deregulated market. There's space for everybody who wants to contribute.
Yeah.
And therefore there shouldn't be this kind of if she wins I lose
No.
attitude. And therefore we shouldn't be so threatened by
Mm.
very competent people trying to help us grow our businesses.
Yeah,
That it
exactly.
feels to me like a waste of talent.
No, and I think there has to be more recognition of what women can do. There's still a few things, um, bad brushes of what women can't do, or even the not providing flexible working in firms, and that automatically puts a large barrier to women, moms, or people with big families. And I think Oblique support really helps that. So tell us the idea behind that and how it supports not just women, but anyone looking for flexible working. But it's been a great help for women with children, especially.
Well, I mean, the idea was very simple.
Mm.
And really, I asked myself, why are we working the way we're working? And why
Mm.
does it have to be that the only way you add value is by being stuck to a chair 24/7, weekends? I mean, I'd done that because I was a trainee and I hardly saw my husband.
Mm.
This is how the pace was shaping. And so there is one space for doing that kind of work in a certain way, maybe because it's needed, it's client driven and whatever. But there's 20% of all legal work maybe needs that kind of setup. 80% can be done in an extended timeline.
Mm.
So I was just simply asking myself, why is that the only way? Because that way clearly doesn't work for so many people
Mm.
that worked so hard to get there. So losing all these city trained lawyers from all these top firms to get a place there is unbelievable, right? So they
Yeah.
would have had to get top A levels, top GCSEs, top degrees, got in there, and suddenly, baby makes all the difference, and suddenly they no good. It's again, it's the zero sum kind of mentality. It's all or
Mm.
nothing, and I just thought that can't be right. There must be value in what these people have to give.
Mm.
So I started from that, what is this talent's kind of strength? What can they do? And it was unbelievable. The types of skills and the kind of, people with fluent Japanese and fluent French. I mean, not just being great
Wow.
lawyers, but all these other amazing
Yeah.
skills. And I just thought, wow, we basically telling these people that they know no good and there's no need for them in the legal
Yeah.
sector. So that was the kind of the business started with this idea of basically why we're allowing all this talent to go to waste when clearly there's
Mhm.
enough work that needs to be done. And I then focused on a particular market because that's what I knew as a from my practice area in the kind of large corporate space, because that was my experience as a lawyer.
Mhm.
And that's where a lot of the work was, because that's where there's a lot of volume of transactions, lots of
Yeah.
things that need to be done. So I kind of went with this: can I match very good lawyers that want to work in a different way, don't want to work full time, to a
Mhm.
type of work that
Yeah.
is not time sensitive? And if I sit in between, I moderate to make sure that the client gets what they want, the lawyer works the way they want, and hopefully it's a win-win.
Mhm.
And so that's what we've done, and that was what we focused on, and encouraging people to work from home. And
Mm.
now that we've all done it, we know it can be done, but you
Works.
wouldn't believe the amount of persuasion we had to carry out to say to people, yes, this lawyer is as great from home as you would be
Mm.
from your office. And give them a chance, give them an opportunity. Especially disability is a big problem,
Yeah.
because if you've got mobility issues, then you can't just go in as easily,
Mm.
or companies are not set up, and that was really disheartening, because people are just being rejected for
Mm.
all the wrong reasons, nothing to do with the technical skills, but actually reasons not to have them in.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm hoping this pandemic has showed how much people could achieve
Mm.
by being allowed to set the hours they work, to have some control over how they deliver their work,
Mm.
and still remain committed to the organization. Um, but anyway, this is a nice change for us, not having to say to people, let's let's work from home. Let's
Definitely.
see how well it works from home, so now
Yeah,
it's quite good that we don't have to have that conversation. Everybody's experienced it.
exactly. There has been a lot of coverage, though, even though we say, work from home has worked and it should carry on working. There's actually been quite a lot of coverage, especially this week, of many large firms still expecting lawyers to be back in the office. Do you think that will halt the advancement that women could make if flexible working was given? Or do you think now that law firms have experienced that flexible working really works and is actually so advantageous to them, it'll carry on?
Well, I think the other stat I saw just today was how much fewer days off people have taken
Mm,
ill, for example, because they didn't have to, go traveling when they were not 100%, but they were
yeah,
feeling with a bit of tea and a paracetamol, actually, they could do some work from home. I think we'll have a very broad spectrum of responses.
yeah,
Firms like Mishcon who basically said, you know what, full flexibility. And then you'll have other firms that will try to really be very regimented in how they will allow it.
mm,
So the culture will really come through, I think. But there will be a real range. Women and a lot of people with carrying responsibilities need flexibility, and there is
mm,
no doubt that they need it.
mm,
Um, and if firms are not taking that seriously, I think there will be another flight of talent because it's invariable.
mm,
We will have to see what the economy will do, because again, if you have a worsening of the economic conditions and firms struggle financially, then
mm,
they have um, more levers to call the shots.
yeah,
If, on the other hand, we're seeing a talent war and people, a tightening of the labor market because obviously we have less immigration coming in from the EU and all of that,
yeah,
then the talent will be able to call for more, lasting change. But
mm,
we don't know yet which way the economy is going
uh,
and which ones will be the ones with the more power, right? So I think it's too early to tell, but I think without the flexibility, there is no doubt that women will suffer.
yeah, definitely. We've seen a lot of growth, but where do you see the legal industry with women in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you see big change?
Well, I can definitely see more women setting up their own businesses, which I think is
Okay.
great because it's a really good way to make something out, in your own image in a way, create the
Mm,
culture you want and grow at your own pace. I think I'm a great supporter of female founders in law, trying to make inroads
mm,
in whatever area they want to practice. And I'm really encouraged by the numbers coming through, setting up, and trying to go grow businesses around them.
mm,
And I hope that continues. But obviously, as I said, that's a change that's external almost.
mm,
Then law firms themselves, I think, the intention for change that lasts is there. They recognize their shortcomings. Obviously, we're having now some of the magic circle senior partners, women, probably will have Linklaters follow Freshfield. So that's pretty good in terms of
mm,
visibility and showing that you can get a woman at the very top.
mm,
Um, so I think it's all good stuff.
mm,
I think we also have our role to play in terms of articulating what this group of larger, increasingly big group of women wants,
mm,
and not ask for everything, ask for key things,
yeah,
so that you don't end up, with the divide and rule, style of, well, but you've asked for this and that and whatever. So I think we need to be much more targeted. What makes a difference? And I think to
mhm,
me, equal pay makes a difference because
mhm,
equal pay allows you to have independent means.
mhm,
If you've got independent means, if you have a child, you can choose how you bring up that child. You
yeah,
don't have the financial pressure to say, I can't afford to have childcare. You can buy in the childcare if you want to, continue your career,
yeah,
but without that financial independence, you have very few choices. And
mm,
so for me, the right kind of level of pay is really critical to women being able to make choices
mm,
in the absence of universal childcare, which is not going to happen here.
no,
So I think, we like the idea, but it's unlikely that it would be some kind of welfare kind of offer in the coming years. So women need to find a way to earn as well as they can. And I think
Mm.
being paid equally for the work is pretty much the basic, demand.
Yeah.
We should have. I mean, I'd like to see quotas introduced because I think that will get more women into leadership faster.
Mm.
And then, this idea of the, allowing people to work from home flexibly, I think that should be the default position if we want
Mm.
women to stay in and not to disconnect. So I think I can see some really big themes that could be totally achieved in 5 years,
Yeah.
um, with the right focus and not being distracted by all the other smaller things that we
Mm.
also need. But, learning from the suffragettes, let's just ask for the vote, get the vote, and then we use the vote.
Use the word.
So it's one big step at a time that can really shift the other ones.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my more strategic thinking, I guess, is what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say when it comes to
No,
women's issues.
I definitely agree, and I really wish a lot of those, no, all of those, are implemented in the next 6 less years if they want. Um, I can't believe how quickly this has gone. Um, so I'm gonna pose my last question to you. What piece of advice would you give someone who's either entering the law or setting up their own business? Through the learnings from your own career, through the 100 years project, and the next 100 years that you've already done, what do you think they should really have or learn? Or there's so many things.
Well, to be honest, I think my main piece of advice is just start.
Okay.
So many people are paralyzed by overthinking everything and overthinking what people will say of them or what might
Mm,
happen if things don't go the right way, and really filling their kind of head with talking themselves out of doing it. So for me, I think whatever you want to do, you will never achieve it if you don't start it.
okay.
um, and don't overthink the consequences of your action. Obviously, don't murder somebody because then you know what happens. But in the context of going to law school and things like that, I think there's so much more opportunity in the world in terms of what you can do and become,
Mm,
that just fixating on one way, is not helpful. So be
yeah.
adaptable and flexible in terms of how you see your life unfold, because
Mm,
there will be things that you don't see come. So for example, my father died suddenly 5 years ago. I didn't know that was happened. That is a completely
um,
external event to everything. And I remember we were just in the middle of the crowdfunding for the first 100 years. We needed to fundraise for the films. I was obviously in the middle of a technical. We were building our technology platform. Literally, we
okay.
started that week. Everything was on an acceleration path, and suddenly my world stopped, and there's nothing you can do about that. You've got to just stop yourself and pick yourself up and then reconfigure what happens. But
Mm,
there's nothing you can do because there will be external changes that will suddenly hit you. They don't have to be as dramatic as in my case. They could be other things, small things that fall in your path,
yeah.
and they cannot destabilize you. You just have to think, it is part of life. Be more
Mm,
philosophical, I guess. Don't be too kind of, exercise some wisdom around the world around.
mm,
But I would say if you start, you will be able to tackle these things as they appear,
yeah.
and then you will also be able to say, you know what, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe I've put too much effort, I've learned what I needed to learn, I'm moving on. But so many people are paralyzed by the thought of, I've already started and it's not working. But
Mm,
actually, the bigger lesson is once you start, everything then it becomes a massive exercise in learning.
yeah.
Whatever the outcome, you will definitely come out a stronger person.
Mm,
So that's my key bit. Is just don't validate your ideas against anybody else. If you think you've got an idea, test it, start something. If it's not working out, it's okay. Nobody's died. It's
yeah.
it's absolutely fine. And you would have learned from it, which is the most important thing to be able to keep doing in life.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I always when I get really scared, I always say there's never truly failure, but there's always lessons. So whatever you do, you may fail, but you'll learn so much from it.
And
Um,
also, it's a different kind of courage that you need, because as we are talking
yeah.
about, big events, big choices in life, None of
Mm.
this. When you look at some of the challenges in the world, which is why I always say, put yourself in the context of the bigger challenges of
Yeah.
humanity. And then you say, well, I'm just a little bit in here trying to
Mm.
make my way. And actually, when you do that, it's so valuable because you realize actually you don't need so much courage to start something,
No.
because at the end of the day, it's not a life and death decision. It is just
Mm.
about, I'm passionate about this, I'm excited about this, I will learn from it, but it won't have life and death
No.
consequences, and let me just do it. And so it gives courage a completely different meaning, and it
Mm.
makes you be more courageous because it's not that kind of courage that puts you into battle and you might die from it.
Yeah.
It's a very gentle kind of courage that you need to start, which is sometimes much scarier than it actually is in
Yeah.
reality. So you don't need so much courage to just do something.
Yeah. Perfect. I love that so much. Thank you so much. There's so many learnings from this. I cannot wait for people to listen to this or watch this on whatever platform they decide. Thank you so, so much for
Well,
today.
thank you so much for
Thank
having me. It's
you, and
really great. I
happy
really
Women's
enjoyed.
Day. Me
Happy
too.
Women's Day.
Thank you.